My name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Rudy Marchesi. It's March 23rd, 2022. We're at Montanor State, Forest Grove. Rudy, thank you so much for joining us today. First question to get us started is why wine?
Why wine? Well, I grew up in an Italian-American family where my father, grandparents all immigrated from northern Italy, and wine was kind of a big part of our life. Our grandfather had made wine for years, semi-professionally during Prohibition. We don't have to go into that. And then, of course, half a dozen barrels a year for the extended family for many years. So it was a big part of our life, the new vintage every year, the process and all of that. So that's where it started. And we had wine with meals. I think my first glass of wine might have been, like 5 years old. My grandmother mixing it with soda, stuff like that. And then an espresso, of course. So wine was just part of life, was part of our meals and part of food. And then I was the kid that didn't drink Bud in college, but always had a gallon of a Red Mountain Burgundy or something like that. So there was that. And then I guess it did kind of hit me. I was in graduate school at Sonoma State in a completely different field. Had a cabin on the Russian River, and I was surrounded by vineyards. So I decided, well, hell, I'm going to make some wine. So I bought a bunch of Zinfandel, and by driving up into the vineyard and walking up to the manager and saying, how much do you want to fill my truck with Zin? Now that I think about it, I haven't been a winery owner and my precious fruit going out the door. But anyway, I didn't know any better at the time. And I called my grandfather and said, hey, what do I do now? I got all this fruit, and fermented out a half a barrel of Zin in my cabin on the Russian River. And that was so much more fun than grad school. So I decided to make a change of career then. And, it was also in the early 70s, and Mother Earth News and Back to the Land and all that. I bought 50 acres with some friends up in the Sierras and built a geodesic dome and all those sorts of things. So I was right in the times. And then I decided I wanted to move back east where I grew up, and found a property on the western edge of New Jersey, which seems pretty incongruous, but I had this, kind of wild idea about Gironde on the East Coast and whatever, But anyway, started a vineyard there and had a lot of success with the wine initially, and formed a company in 1982 where we were one of the first farm wineries in New Jersey. Prior to that, they'd only allowed one winery per million people, So in 82, the farm winery I passed, we were allowed to, if you grew your own grapes, you could make wine. And I started a winery called Alba Vineyard that I ran for, 15 plus years, owned and ran. And, that was an interesting learning experience. Very difficult place to grow grapes, because it rains 4 inches a month in a hot, humid summer. But I developed a lot of good skills and worked through that. And then, I had 2 daughters, you know that. And when they needed to go to college, I needed to make more money than just, my little cellar door winery that I was running. So I took a job with an import wholesale company that felt they needed a little more cred in hands-on the wine world, so they hired me to run their fine wine division that they were just creating. And that helped me just to get out and have international experience. I was able to travel around the world visiting producers. I did all the wine education for our sales team of up to about 20 salespeople, and just had a great deal of experience. I got into the Master of Wine course and studied in that for a few years. So that was a real important kind of turning point from being a little local winemaker to having a more global experience. I also had some great opportunities, and it will tie into what we did at Montanor. Back in 1988, I was, I guess I was vice chairman or chairman or something of the New Jersey Wine Advisory Board, and we were given a grant to go to Vinitaly as part of a U.S. delegation for presenting wines at Vinitaly, which in and of itself was close to Newcastle and kind of laughable, I think. But because my family was from there, I had contacts, and we were very interested in finding the right varieties for New Jersey. So I was able to contact my sister's father-in-law, who's very active he created a regional preserve, and kind of environmentalist guy. He was the mayor of our dad's hometown, and got the weather data for all of northern Italy, and was able to correlate that to something similar to what we had in our New Jersey locations, and then set up appointments at 5 different research stations around New Jersey, around northern Italy, which was really super fun and really educational. And I met some amazing people. Dr. Fergoni, who was head of the INOA at that time, Dr. Scienza at San Michele, who's become like one of the top guys in gene sequencing and things like that. So I got a great education just on that trip, and that's why we grew Tirol on the grind at Montanor. Anyhow, I did my time in wholesale, learned that end of the business, which I think is really important for anybody that ever is going to own a winery. You have to understand this distribution world, which is a little different than you might think, but it gave me a real leg up when I finally got to Montanor. And then after I paid off all the college tuition for my girls, I left wholesale, went back to my little winery. But I had been selling Oregon wines at our wholesale house in New Jersey, and got to know a lot of Oregon wine people. And the folks at Montanor asked me to help them out they wanted to develop national distribution. So I started doing that as a consultant, and I'd come out here and I saw that they needed help in the vineyard, and every time I came out I did a little bit more, and eventually they hired me as the vice president of the company to oversee operations, and that kind of evolved into becoming president of the winery, even though I was commuting back and forth. Got a lot of frequent flyer miles, and still keeping the little New Jersey winery going at the same time. And then eventually the Graham family, who owned the winery, started Montanor and owned it. They wanted to retire, and their kids didn't want to take on the winery, so I had the opportunity to buy Montanor from the Grahams, and that was back in the end of 2005. So I sold everything. I had a couple farms on the East Coast and sold them, and moved out here, lock, stock, and barrel. No pun intended. So.
Well, we're going to come back. Obviously, a lot of questions about Montanor itself, but some questions about kind of the along the way. So you mentioned, obviously, New Jersey, not a place people think of as vineyard land, as wine territory. Tell me about the process of developing an industry there, developing what you can grow and how to sell a wine region that no one's ever really heard of before. How did you make it work?
Yeah, that's a good question. And of course, New Jersey's the butt of a lot of jokes, and so we had a couple of challenges there. But we had the support of the Department of Agriculture and the government in general. I was able to fund my winery through a public bond issue through the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, because they were like, really? A winery? We're used to just doing factories and processing plants. This sounds wonderful. So, I'm not sure if there's any other winery that's ever been funded with a public bond issue, but that in itself was an experience. But, the Department of Ag, we formed within the Department of Ag the Wine Advisory Board. Within the Department of Tourism, we formed the Governor's Tourism Council on Wine, which I served on all of those things. And we had a good little industry organization not unlike, it used to be the Yamhill County, and then it became the Willamette Valley. Same sort of thing. It was the Hunterdon County wine growers, and it became the New Jersey wine growers, and we expanded it as vineyards started being planted in the southern part of the state and created a nice statewide industry organization. And I worked with a really wonderful woman at Rutgers, Dr. Goulart, and we created an educational program like the Wine Symposium. Hell, that was 30 some odd years ago. And it's still going on today, So we did things like that just to get the ball rolling. And then Pennsylvania and of course New York was very far ahead of us, so we kind of coattailed on their experiences, and of course the great educational programs that Cornell and Penn State had going on. So, a lot of will and a lot of youthful energy, and it really got it going. So now, New Jersey's got, 60 wineries or something like that, and it's going. It's happening.
What about with the grapes themselves? Was it a lot of trial and error, or what was the ideas you had? What were the ideas you had for what would grow there and what you could sell?
Man, global warming has had a big impact on that. So initially, it was a lot of French hybrids, Marshall Foch, which was also here in Oregon, and Vidal Blanc, Seyval Blanc, things like that, And I remember I felt that we could do vinifera, and I put in a few acres of vinifera, and that winter it hit minus 18 Fahrenheit, and crown gall erupted everywhere. It was a disaster, But since then, there were 2 winters back to back that were at minus 18, minus 12, and then since then, it hardly ever gets in the single digits anymore. So global warming has changed it tremendously. So they're able now to grow more vinifera because we could figure out that they just did a lot better wine quality wise. The weather was challenging. One of the things that that I didn't like about growing grapes there is that there was so much pressure with, we had powdery mildew, we had downy mildew, we had phomopsis, we had black rot, you name it, 2 kinds of botrytis. So farming organically was not an option. At least it didn't seem like it for me, and that was always a high priority for me. I'd grown up in a family where gardening was really big. I had my first garden by the time I was 7, and it was always organically farmed, and that just meant a lot to me in terms of purity of food and product and all that. So that was one of the things that attracted me to Oregon. It's a much more hospitable environment.
You mentioned kind of you got into the distribution part a little bit later. Before you had that experience with selling and distribution, tell me about selling wine, New Jersey wine. How did you? Where were your markets? How did you sell wine? Who was buying from you, and how did it change as you were there?
It was predominantly cellar door, and it still is. The thing that was appealing from that point of view is that within 100 miles there were 15 million people. So it wasn't too hard to get people out, and we were doing something new and different, and people were interested. New Jersey is the 5th, 6th largest wine buying state in the country. So there's a big market, and if you could get them to come out on the weekend and buy some wine, it worked. 3-tier, I was able to get into the 3-tier and had some success, but mostly with fruit wine. It wasn't really where I wanted to be in terms of my winemaking career, but we utilized that as a revenue stream. But most of it was cellar door sales.
Tell me about winemaking and about learning the process. You mentioned kind of your first experience on the Russian River and being immediately intrigued by it. What did you have to learn? How long did it take you to feel comfortable making wine, growing grapes, doing the whole process?
Yeah, I'd done fine as an amateur winemaker getting my feet wet, but when I started the winery, our first harvest was 83, and I hired a guy that had gotten a degree from UC Davis that just happened to be living down the road, and his girlfriend and I were playing in a band together. It was completely, serendipitous. And he was looking for work, so he came on, and I learned a lot from him on process, on chemistry, on all of that, and that helped an awful lot. And then I went to every single thing that Cornell and Penn State put on in terms of educational programs. So they had some really good programs going, and I learned a lot through that. And just like a lot of guys my age at that time, like here in Oregon, just learn by doing. So.
As you started developing, you mentioned organic farming being something that was important to you and difficult to do where you were. What about on the winemaking side? Did you have a style in mind or a process in mind that you wanted to make, or an end result that you were hoping for in the wines?
Yeah, I had grown up drinking Italian wine and European wine. And I'd come of age in California, when I was in grad school there. And there was a short period where I was enamored with those very ripe kind of styles, but for the most part, I really liked European style wine. So that was something that that was my compass, my stylistic compass.
So tell me about, you mentioned kind of coming into contact with Oregon wines as you started working with distribution. What were some of your early impressions of Oregon wines and winemakers as you started to get to know the industry a little bit?
Well, for starters, I'd like to take credit for being, very thoughtful, logical process, but it really wasn't. My oldest daughter, who is this brilliant PhD in the world of environmental science and food processing and all that stuff, elected to go to Reed College for her undergrad. And so in our wholesale house, and that's what I was doing at that time, we had a really good Burgundy portfolio, and I was responsible for a lot of that. So I was already tuned into Pinot Noir. So when I came out here to visit my daughter, I'm like, wow, they're growing Pinot Noir out here. What's this all about, And then I just got swept away in the enthusiasm of the potential of Oregon, even though, that was the early 90s and still finding its way. Maybe there were 130 wineries at that time, something like that. But I just saw that there was a lot of potential here, and they were trying to do something here that nobody else in the United States was doing, and I thought they could pull it off. So that's when I started bringing back, Montanor wine, Ken Wright's wine, Panther Creek before he was at Ken Wright, and who else did we have? We had Witness Tree. We had a nice little portfolio, and it was fun. I got to know the wines, and I got to know the people, and the more and more I really was drawn toward Oregon.
The first, if you can remember, the first Oregon wines you tried, you mentioned potential. What was your impression of the actual wine? Was it good yet? Was it great? Like where was it on the scale for you?
It was. There were good ones and there were bad ones. It was pretty erratic. I think at that time, we do a lot better job now in understanding how to manage the vineyards through different variations of weather conditions, and then how to manage that fruit in the winery. So there were some years that were spectacular and others that were less than good, So I saw that as a challenge, but that was something that could be overcome.
And what about the people here? Were they reminiscent of other wine regions to you, or was there something unique about Oregon?
Yeah, for sure. It was in its infancy, but emerging. There was a great deal of enthusiasm and pride in what had been done, but humility and understanding that there was a long way to go, and I admired that. I don't have much tolerance for big egos, so I didn't find that here at all, like in some other regions. So I felt comfortable, and I was really attracted to kind of the collegial nature of the industry, at that time, and it's still there.
So let's talk about Montanor a little bit. You mentioned kind of dipping your toe in the Montanor waters and ending up as the president. So yeah. I want to talk about your first interactions with the place, your first impressions of the place. What were the wines like, and what was the place like at the time when you first kind of came into contact with it?
Very impressive. It was a big estate, and I always felt that brands. So if I was looking for a brand for distribution, I felt that brands that had their own vineyards were really the best bet. For a lot of regions, a lot of reasons, and so it was a big, well-funded winery. I thought the wines were lacking, and the more I got involved, the more I realized it was because of the viticulture. But there were some really brilliant spots, some really great wines in the early years. So the potential was there. And the owners at that time recognized that they needed help, and we saw eye to eye on that. So that made it kind of a fun, unusual relationship. Because I said, well, I can't move to Oregon, and they said, that's okay. Just come when you can and do what you have to do. I'm like, okay. So it was a very a relationship that worked for me personally, and I don't know, it just worked out.
So you mentioned wines lacking, and as you got into it, viticulture being kind of the culprit for that.
Yeah.
So first step, once you're officially you're hired in as vice president, you're not here all the time.
Yep.
What's your first step?
First step was getting the vineyard in good shape. I mean, they had started down the right road, but there were catch wires installed and never utilized, so the vines were what we refer to as gorilla vines, and there was lots of mildew when it would rain in September, and so just cleaning that whole thing up, and getting just a good viticulture program going, because if you don't have the grapes, you're not going to make the wine, So that's where I started, and the vineyard manager quit shortly after I started kicking up dust, and I was working with Jacques Tardy, who was here at that time, and Jacques kind of filled in for a while, overseeing the vineyard operations, because I wasn't here that much, but I started coming more frequently, and I was able to, because that was too much for one person to make all the wines and to oversee the vineyards on this scale. So I took over the vineyard management, and then once the grapes started coming in better, we were able to make better wines, and then we started reviewing the winemaking processes, just like everybody else was, I guess, at that time, and eliminating the parts of the process that created more coarse, rustic kind of wines, and looked for more refinement, more fruit expression, and that got us only so far. And then that's when I started looking at kind of really refining how we grow and getting the vineyards into organic and eventually biodynamic to get more expression of place. And I think this is kind of interesting. In Oregon, everybody planted their own, own rooted. And so Montanor was planted in 82, 83 predominantly, and it was all sticks in the ground. And that all worked really well until, in the mid-90s, they started selling fruit to the Aubon Clement winery down on the central coast of California. Jim Clendenin would come up here and buy fruit for his wine and for another brand he was making, Ici Là-bas. And don't you know, right where Jim would park his truck up on the hill there and put down his totes and fill them up with grapes was where the phylloxera started. So it was in 98 that we discovered the phylloxera, and that was the year I had started at Montanor. And it spread pretty quickly. And that really drove me to understanding why vines decline due to phylloxera, and ways to mitigate it using the power of nature, if you will. We started working with a lot of compost, whereas previous to that, all the pumice from harvest was considered a waste product. We were turning it into good good fertilizer, and working very deliberately on building up the microbiome, especially mycorrhizal fungi that were needed to colonize around the roots of the vines to help them protect themselves against the pathogenic fungi that were getting in and rotting, so they could tolerate some phylloxera chewing without getting let's just say a bad fungal infection, in the root zone. So that really was a motivating factor in driving hard into organic. So that happened somewhere around 2001, I guess, is when we stopped using herbicides. And then I'd always, when I was back in wholesale, I'd seen, as I was getting wines in for distribution, there was always something really special about these biodynamic wines that we'd get in, especially from Burgundy and Rhone. And, I would taste them like, well, that's good. And then I would see, oh, that's biodynamic. That's interesting. So the more that happened, the more it really intrigued me. And I wanted to know what was going on. Mm-hmm. And, of course, there weren't very many places to find out. Through a friend of a friend, anyway, I found out about this 12-month course that was offered at a little college in New York State, where one of the pioneers of biodynamic farming in the United States had his laboratories and experimental gardens and all that. So I enrolled in that and took that class, and got a really great education in the fundamentals of biodynamics, and was able to come back here to Montanor and start trying it out. So that was in 2003, and we had a couple blocks that on paper should have been great, and they were always underperforming, and the wine was kind of ho-hum. And we did some biodynamic sprays on them and immediately saw a response. And since then, those blocks have been part of the reserve program. It just responded so well that I said, all right, we need to do this. So over the course of 3 years, we went from just 20 acres to, at that time, we were about 240, 260. So it took a few years to kind of get it all rolling. And then once we got it all integrated and the processes in place and multiple years of farming that way, we really saw an evolution in the not only the way the vines looked and acted and performed. They were performing better from just a purely functional point of view, but the wines got more expressive. Mm-hmm. And at first we thought it was vintage variation, and then we finally figured out it was expression of terroir. Mm-hmm. So we were actually making that connection through that intensive viticulture. So making the connection from sight to the glass of wine, which had always been my goal.
So that time period covers when you actually bought the property. Is that correct?
Yeah, I bought the property at the end of 2005. Yeah, so by 2000, I started in 2003, and the owners were like, yeah, try whatever you want, but don't spend a lot of money, And so I was able to really go at it, and by the 2006 season, hired a consultant who was originally from Châteauneuf-du-Pape that came up and gave us some great advice on kind of turning around some vineyards that were not in great shape, and getting the whole place up to a whole different level of quality and health. So 2006 on, and then we finally got certified in 2008. Yeah.
Obviously, it's a big property to be biodynamic, and it's I believe still the biggest single biodynamic vineyard around.
Well, one of them.
One of.
Yeah.
Tell me about the challenges of biodynamics at scale. Was it more than you expected? Was it difficult? What were the biggest kind of obstacles?
It was easier than I expected. We have a great team that have been here in the vineyard, that have been here sometimes, some of them 30 years, their goal is to have a healthy vineyard, to grow good grapes. And what kind of surprised me was once I started, I I realized I needed to kind of share this information with our vineyard crew. Most everyone's primary language was Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish, so I found this young woman from Panama who was she had been working at Josephine Porter Institute, doing a lot of work in biodynamics, making preparations and all that. And I hired her to do educational classes for our series of, I think, 4 or something, for our team. And what surprised me was they were like, oh yeah, this makes really good sales. This is what our parents used to do in Mexico, So it was like they were very happy to get rid of the hazmat suits and not worry about what was being sprayed. And our team really embraced the practices of biodynamics. So that in itself made it a lot easier. And then scaling up, we just needed bigger compost spreaders. We had to build some stirring machines for the sprays, but that was just mechanics.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned seeing kind of immediate results in a certain block. Tell me about once you kind of got all biodynamic and had the full system running. Was it as immediate? Did you feel that the site was at that point producing better grapes, better wines immediately?
No, it took a few years. It's not like this panacea. But we did over the course of a few years. One of the challenges that you can have in a vineyard is erratic vine size, right? And big ones crowding out the guys next door, and you're out there hedging all the time, and uneven fruit ripening and veraison and all that sort of stuff. And what we saw was that after a few years of the biodynamics, the vine size started becoming more uniform. Mm-hmm. And it was almost like the vineyard started working as a community of vines rather than a bunch of individuals, And so vine size became more uniform. Hedging wasn't quite the big problem that had been before. We also started seeing more uniform veraison. Mm-hmm. So, and I had started a verjus project, which we still do today, but I started that because we'd have so many green grapes that we'd go out and we'd harvest everything that was green when we were about 80% through veraison, because there was that much difference. And we found that change, the change was that we'd have more uniform color change, and we'd eventually have more uniform ripening, mm-hmm. which eliminated some of the green flavors that we had been battling, because you had some underripe grapes and overripe grapes. So that uniformity of ripening really made a big difference, I think, in wine quality. Mm-hmm. And then the fact that literally the vines were more integrated into the site through the interaction with the biology in the soil, and we've been enhancing the biology in the soil through compost preparations and sprays and things. There's just more of it, and it was more vibrant and more alive, and the vines were literally interacting through these mycorrhizal fungi and whatever. The expression of the place started showing in the glasses of wine. And to me, that was like the most exciting thing going, that's what we want to do as winemakers, Mm-hmm. So we had almost inadvertently discovered a tool that made that work. So,
were the vines you were working with, had you done replanting after phylloxera, or were these still original vines that you were just managing?
We had planted in the in 99 and 2001, 2 blocks on the north corner with rootstock. But other than that, everything was own rooted. So, and I'd done some where we had those old-fashioned wide spacing, like where you have 7 foot across, wide. We did some layering, so we'd bring canes down under, and then so we'd go to 3.5 foot spacing. We did some kind of crazy things like that worked out. And in some spots I felt where the soil was deep enough, I didn't have a lot of revenue, I had a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of will, but not a lot of money. So when I replanted some of the older blocks, if I felt the soils were of the type that could allow suppression of phylloxera, we planted on own rooted again, because that's all I had money for. And it worked. Those vineyards are still doing fine, so that was like 10, 15 years ago. So, yeah, kind of a wild, crazy ride here.
What was when you started planting biodynamically? What was Oregon's biodynamic scene like? Was there anybody else doing biodynamic at the time?
Yeah, Cooper Mountain was the first, and I remember going to right when I started taking that class, I went to a session that they did, which is kind of inspiring, and then I remember. No, I can't remember his name now. Some fella had worked in Switzerland, did some classes for people, but I had already enrolled in the thing at the Pfeiffer Center, so I didn't take those. But once I got here and was really engaged and had bought the property, there was a small working group, Doug Tennell and Mike Etzel and some other folks, and we would get together and just kind of study and talk about what we were doing and visit each other's wineries. And that lasted for a couple, 3 years and then sort of faded away. But, now that what's really encouraging, there's a lot of young farmers that, not only grapes, but a lot of vegetable farmers and, some dairy people, and get together regularly. And so there's a building of biodynamic activity and awareness. And over the years we hosted several workshops here, bringing in people that were great educators and very knowledgeable, and having sessions here at Montanor for people. So that worked. Matter of fact, we're going to do another one this summer. So I've tried on my own to help kind of spread the word,
How have you seen the kind of the reputation, I guess, of biodynamics change since you've been here? I mean, we've interviewed a lot of people over the years, a lot of varying opinions on it, but it seems to be much more commonplace and accepted now than when we started.
Yeah.
Is that your experience as well?
Well, full disclosure, for the past 3 years, I've been president of Demeter USA, which is the certifying agency for all the farms and processors in the United States of biodynamic farms. So I've had both feet in that, and we just launched. We merged with the Biodynamic Association. It took us almost 3 years to do it, and just launched this January the new organization called the Biodynamic Demeter Alliance, which has brought together the Biodynamic Association and Demeter, the certifying agency. And we're going to be, I'm no longer, my board term ended, and I was like, hallelujah. It was like a full-time job aside from this. But we've crossed the finish line 7 days before my term ended, so I felt very happy about saying, okay, guys, good luck. But I'm still very active. I'm working with them. We're going to be doing some educational seminars. I have a friend in Italy who is probably the foremost consultant in biodynamics in Italy, and he runs some really high-quality advanced biodynamic seminars, so we're going to start bringing them to the United States. So I'm still very active in all this stuff. In terms of awareness, it's unfortunately been like this little club, which is not good from a business point of view. So in this new organization, the alliance that we formed, there are going to be three divisions, if you will, of activity. One, which is the certification agency, the one which will be the educational outreach portion, and then the third, which is a new creation, is going to be for economy and trade, and we'll be working on building consumer awareness, marketing and public relations, and also working for the vegetable growers and processors for products on more appropriate and effective channels of distribution. If you look at Germany, the biodynamic Demeter certified products are considered like the gold standard in food. You want to get the best stuff, you buy the Demeter stuff, and they have trouble filling the market because it's so much in demand. So I know the potential is there. Just we have to wake up the American public to understand what it is that biodynamic farming is and the quality of the products.
So take me through the growth of Montanor after you purchased it, especially. You had already installed a lot of things at that point. You had biodynamic coming, you had organic, you had biodynamic coming. Once you took over as owner and you had that in process, how did it grow from there? What were your kind of long-term goals, short-term, long-term goals, and how did the upcoming years go?
Well, I'm a pretty nuts and bolts kind of guy, and I'm not big into luxury and all that, so I've never really attracted to that end of the market. For better, for worse, I have no judgments on that. So, but I say that because my approach was colored by that, by my life, So what I wanted to produce here at Montanor was a wine that was fairly priced. It was affordable, that we could, we had the capacity to have enough volume to cover our needs from a revenue point of view. So part of that was getting good broad distribution, and that was something I was good at. So I had been building up the market for Montanor prior to purchasing it, and then I just continued on that. So we currently in 45 states or whatever it is, with good distributors. I've built up a really good distributor network, with kind of mid-size, where we just weren't, fighting the 800-pound gorillas of the California wine world, but we weren't dealing with little people where you had to worry about getting paid or whether their top salesman quit or whatever, So kind of the mid-range. And I think that has really, been part of the success of Montanor, that we have a great distribution network and a lot of good distribution partners that we've had relationships for a long time. That, coupling it with a real dedication to always improving the product, always over delivering. If somebody pays $20 for a bottle of wine, I want it to taste like it's $30. That was part of the philosophy, to over deliver on quality. And it's easy to say, but if you keep at it, you can achieve it. And I feel for the most part we have. So we have very loyal customer base.
Did you have a size in mind for amount of wine produced in a year? Did you have a kind of penciled out for how much you wanted to make and how long you wanted to get there?
Yeah, when I got here, it was all over the lot. It was 35 to 75,000 cases, depending on what they got, and did they crop it at 4 tons an acre or whatever. So we brought down the yields to kind of a balanced level for quality, and I felt kind of max would be about 50,000 cases, because once you get beyond that, then you have to engage in a whole other set of activities and other scales, and I think once you cross 50,000, you better be at 200,000. So I didn't have the capital to do that, or the will, really. I thought I could make a really nice living at 40 to 50,000 cases and pay our people well, and have a nice life. So that's where we stuck.
You mentioned people. I'm curious about you building a team here. You mentioned you had a team of vineyard workers who were excited to do biodynamics. When you started to grow and hire, what were you looking for as you built your team here?
People that were interested in putting out a really good product and didn't have big egos. It's people that we could work well together with, that we could have a nice collegial, almost like family environment, which we did. And you got to come here every day, so you want to be happy when you show up. And people that enjoyed their work. So that was it. And of course, skill sets were important, but I never really mandated that you had to have the degree. It was more about what could you do, and that you don't always hit, but for the most part that worked for us.
So tell me about the next shift at Montanor. Then obviously you owned for a long time.
Yeah.
What was the next shift for you then?
I realized that the company needed a lot of capital. to keep up with the rest of the world, and to renew what was getting older and all that. And I wasn't at a place in my life where I wanted to take on a lot of debt. And my daughter and I, Kristen, had been running it together, and she wasn't interested in a lot of debt. We just didn't want to go there. It changes the whole dynamic. Instead of running a winery, then you're chasing dollars, and you have to develop other skill sets, and it's not what I wanted for my career. So the alternative was to find partners, which we did. We had been approached by a few companies, and some of them really big, and I could see they would just swallow up the brand, and our team would lose their jobs, and so that wasn't what we wanted to do. And we were very fortunate to kind of run into this gentleman, Jay Ackley, from up in Seattle, who just a good, smart businessman that saw the long-term benefit of being in the beverage industry, the wine beverage industry. And after a long courtship, we decided to team up, and he bought majority interest in the winery and put in the capital that was needed. And we've been able to really refine what we'd already been doing and expand. So now we bought a really great vineyard just above where Jadot Residence is, and tremendous fruit off of that vineyard. And then we bought another 177 acres next door to Willikenzie on that ridge there, and we're planting that out. And so we're not growing volume that much, but the quality of what we're producing is getting better and better every year, and allowing us to increase our prices and to just make for a healthy company.
So at that point, how did your role change?
I don't have to worry about payroll anymore, which is a wonderful thing. Jay's son Brandon is really good at all that, and a good young business person. So he handles a lot of the business end of things now, and I can focus more on viticulture, winemaking. I still, have a lot of relationships out in the marketplace, so I'll do market visits, just kind of key market visits, do a lot of presentations and education on our farming practices, and related to biodynamics, because it's been such a big part of our brand identity. So I do that sort of stuff, and just kind of keep an eye on things, work closely with my partners on long-term planning. And
with the new vineyard specifically, was that, you mentioned kind of the capital needed for growth, was that something you saw was needing more vineyard land in the area and if so, what about these particular lots excited you?
Well, there was a few different things. One was that, we're here on this spot, which is a very unique spot. It's, now it's part of the Tualatin Hills AVA that I worked with our neighbors to create, and has a very specific profile because of the Missoula flood soils that we have. And it also, we have very subtle but different climatic conditions than different parts of the valley. And I felt it made a lot of sense to have vineyards in other parts of the valley where you have different soil types, maybe different weather patterns slightly, to kind of not only broaden the palette, if you will, of the colors we have to work with when we're creating wines, but also kind of hedge our bets in terms of vintage conditions and whatnot. So that was something, so the two vineyards we bought are in Yamhill Carlton, but on opposite ends of the Yamhill Carlton, one way over in the hills, on the western hills, and the other right up in the heart of it, with the real classic Willikenzie soils and all that. So that was one of the goals.
And you mentioned you're already excited about the fruit. What are your kind of early impressions or early returns from those new sites?
Oh, it's really interesting. One thing about our wines off of the home site here in the Tualatin Hills is they're on the savory side and spicy, and that can be really interesting and intriguing. But in some vintages, I feel like maybe they're lacking a little fruit to support that or to balance that. So if you get down to Yamhill Carlton, there's this rich, dark berry, almost plum type of character that can support the savory character of the wines up here. But only in the reds. I think the whites from up in these Missoula flood soils are really exceptional, and I'm glad we have them. But then if you compare central Yamhill Carlton to that coastal area, that's really interesting because the soils in that vineyard, which we call Tidal Star, there's a lot of marine basalt mixed in with this marine sedimentary soil, and just gives the wines a really distinctive kind of structural, almost like a mineral graphite kind of quality. I don't know how to explain it, but you taste it. So there's a uniqueness to it that I think is really dynamic and desirable. People really like those wines.
So I want to ask you about 2020 for a second. Everybody's favorite year to talk about. Kind of two big parts of 2020 that affected the industry. Let's talk about the pandemic first. March of 2020, as things started to kind of close down, what were the initial reactions for you and for the team here to get through, and how did you kind of pivot that year to get by?
Well, unlike a lot of our neighbors, we were just under 25% cellar door sales. And so we had a very strong 3-tier program. It was really tough on our DTC folks from a tasting room point of view. On the flip side of that, our wine club grew like crazy. So that was good. And, we had a pretty nice balance of on-premise, off-premise out there in the market. Mm-hmm. But because we're not very expensive, we're kind of moderate premium price, we could have appeal in the off-premise shops, and because we're not heavily engaged in grocery store chains or anything like that, it's more independent shops. Mm-hmm. We were able to make that shift from on-premise, which died completely, to the off-premise, and we were revenue neutral between 19 and 20. Mm-hmm. So I was very proud of that. Wow. It was hard. We had to shut down the tasting room for I don't know how many months, but then we gradually opened up outdoors when the weather was good, appointment only, separated. You could only have so many people, but that at least kept our DTC cellar door sales program going, and we got better at wholesale, I think. So we're growing nicely. We're having a wonderful year this year, and we had an up year last year. Mm-hmm. So we bounced back from the pandemic in pretty good shape, I think. Good. Yeah.
The other part of 2020 obviously was harvest. Tell me about the effects of 2020's harvest fires on you here, and again how you sort of managed it.
It was really interesting because the first fires were right over the hill, and so it was southwest. The fires are southwest of us, right? And I live a mile that way, so I was between where the fires were in the Montanor vineyard here, and we had that weird set of wind conditions that came in out of the northeast, right? So I would stand in my backyard and I'd look towards Montanor and I would see blue sky, and I would look in the opposite direction and it would be brown and orange and rolling, and it was apocalyptic looking, and those fires only lasted a short while, and they were able to get them under control. And then the fires broke out down around Salem and right over here on Bald Peak area. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the prevailing winds shifted to their normal northwest, so they were blowing most of the smoke that way. So yeah, we had smoky days, but it wasn't like our neighbors to the east of us that really got hammered. So long story short, we had 2 lots of wine that we just didn't want, right? But once they were RO'd, had no problem selling it to other people who didn't have any wine. And the 20s are really nice, but there's just a small vintage, you know. So what we bottled, we really like. We didn't make any single vineyard wines, just not because the quality wasn't there, but because the reputation of the vintage we just knew was going to be not good.
Hard sell.
So, yeah, hard sell. So we just put everything into our you know, our regular products, and we did okay, you know. Just the volume was small, and unfortunate because 21 volume was small too, due to the extreme weather, and you know, we had some hail here and during bloom, and fruit set, and then that was 115 degree days didn't help us at all, you know. So it's been a tough couple of years. But what we put in the bottle was really good, just not enough of it, you know. So
you brought up the new AVA here, the Tualatin Hills AVA. Yeah. Tell me about the process for that, the kind of the impetus for it, and then the process of actually getting it done.
Well, you know, I had created an AVA back in New Jersey, whenever that was, 1985 or something. Right when the AVA thing started. So I knew the process, and we were successful and got it created, you know. And I remember when Dave Adelsheim called me up here and said, "Hey, we're doing this Chehalem Mountain AVA, and we don't feel like your vineyard is really part of it, but you're close enough and you're big enough. You know, how do you feel about it? You know, would you want to be included in it or not? You know?" And I said, "No, I don't think we should be in it. You know, we're very different than Chehalem Mountain, and we have a whole different set of conditions over here." And that just came off the top of my head, you know, but it just felt like the right thing. And so after that, I always kept thinking, we should do something. And it took a lot of years, and I think Alfredo Apolloni kind of poked me one day and said, "Why don't we do something, you know?" So we did, and worked together on it. And worked with our neighbors, and Mike over at David Hill Winery did a lot of work with us, and I knew the process, so I kind of, those guys did a lot of the heavy lifting and drawing the maps and visiting people, and I just wrote the narrative and I knew the parameters that they needed in order to recognize that this region had distinctive qualities enough to be a separate AVA. So between the three of us, we put together a really good packet, and it got through. So,
what are the distinctive characteristics?
Well, for one thing, the entire AVA is all Missoula Flood Los. Now the Laurelwood district is only Missoula Flood Los, and we're the only two districts in the state that have that. And the interesting thing about the Tualatin Hills, so it's in the watershed of the Tualatin River. It's coming from the west over to the Willamette, and it's kind of like an open horseshoe with the open to the east. So as the winds were blowing, that silt that had formed from the dry silt from the Missoula floods, it blew it up into the hills and got caught in this horseshoe. So this whole band in this horseshoe of the AVA is all this Missoula Flood Los, you know, different series, but all the same kind of Laurelwood stuff. And so we just picked the parameters of 200 feet, which below that, you know, it's not so good for grapes, and 1,000 feet, keeping it in keeping with the Willamette Valley border elevation. So the soil was one thing, and then the other thing, there are a couple of things. Because the prevailing winds come out of the northwest area, the coastal range is significant. So we're the opposite of Van Duzer Corridor, where that coastal range dips down, and there's a lot of maritime. We have the highest peaks here, so we have almost a more continental, if you will, effect, where we're cooler in the spring and warmer in the fall, and that's easily documented through weather records. And the same thing is we're in a rain shadow because of those mountains here in this part of the valley. So we have less rainfall here than, say, if you go east. So there's unique conditions that way. And then I think anyone who participated in Pinot Camp over the years recognizes that these soils have a distinctive character in the glass. So that was part of it too. And there's a lot of, I can't remember off the top of my head, but we were kind of surprised at how many vineyards are in this AVA. There's a lot of grape growing up in here. So
with that, have you seen what was the reasoning behind wanting the AVA? In addition to, besides just being characteristic, was there a marketing bit to it for you? Was there something else? And have you seen any returns on it yet?
Yes, of course there's a marketing thing. Yeah, that was the main motivation. We felt like we had something unique, and we wanted recognition in the marketplace, and a way to talk about our wines that was distinct from the rest of the Willamette Valley. So that was a big driver, and I think that's half of the motivation on any AVA. I don't think there's been a big uptick in recognition or sales. It's just in its infancy. We need to form an organization. We need to start beating our own drum. There's all that kind of stuff. But just creating the AVA among that small sliver of consumers that really pay attention to that stuff, we've seen interest. So the germ is there, the potential is there. Now it just needs to be developed more.
So we've talked a little bit about kind of the evolution of Oregon's industry, but I'm curious. You've been around it a long time, both in it and from without it. What are the biggest sort of changes in Oregon that you've seen? Obviously, the size has grown a lot, but in addition to size, what else has changed about the Oregon wine industry? What does it look like today to you compared to when you first saw it?
Well, when I first saw it, I'd go around to shops and like, I didn't know they made wine in Oregon, literally. And I heard a lot of that. And then the ones that were more savvy, it can be good, but it's erratic, so that was the original. When I first got involved in the industry, we were fighting that battle. I think there was always an aspiration for the high price point, super premium, but it took a while to get there, and sort of fits and starts. So now I think the mean price for Willamette Valley wine is a whole lot higher than any of us would have expected, maybe. And of course the growth. There's a lot of garage yeasts, and there's a lot of virtual brands that sort of, it's ancillary and they come and go, but the core group of brands that are growing grapes and doing, my prejudice, doing it the right way, has grown, and it's now you're into the second generation, and that seems really great and healthy, and there's a dynamism in that, in that we're really here, and we're here to stay, and we're a real wine region. Crossing that 50-year mark was pretty significant, and I think we have, I travel a lot in Europe mostly, and we have an international reputation. We really do, and it's a good one, So I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud to be part of it.
What about as you look ahead for Oregon wine? Obviously, coming out of a couple of rough years, what is next? What are we looking at?
Yeah, I'm not worried about the rough years. A little worried about global warming, and I think we're going to see the premium vineyards shifting closer to the coast, more into the hills, higher elevations, things like that. I don't think we're going to be abandoning Pinot Noir anytime soon. We still do really, really well. And there's other parts of the world that are warmer than we are that produce good Pinot Noir. So I think we'll be okay that way. But it'll shift. I think some of the vineyards on the eastern side, it's just going to get too hot. But that's my own observation. I think our reputation is going to continue to grow, and I think Willamette Valley at some point in the not too distant future will have the reputation like Napa Valley does just for Pinot Noir. We're already partway there. And the industry's going to change. I think more money's going to come in. It'll get a little more corporate, unfortunately. But I think the basis of family farms and family-owned operations gives us a really good foundation. So I think I only see good things for Oregon wine.
Obviously, you mentioned corporate, a lot of money coming in recent years. Have you seen the industry change, even in the last 5-10 years? Have you seen it change in terms of collegiality, in terms of the kind of communal work that had brought it here, or does it still feel that way to you?
It still feels that way. I mean, like when Jackson family came in, we were all kind of nervous. They've been a great neighbor, and of course their business model is such that they respect the individual properties that they have, so that helps an awful lot. I haven't seen any 800-pound gorillas come in. We did have that little period with Copper Cane and all of that, and he's back in California now, so that's good. We don't need that kind of an industry. So for the most part, everyone is land-based. They respect the fact that wine comes from grapes, and that's very fundamental and very important, and that we're all working hard towards the same goal. So there's not I talk to colleagues from California, and they often talk about kind of a cutthroat attitude among wineries in their own regions. We don't have that. I never experienced that. Yeah, we're competitive. We're just that's kind of the nature of being a business. But nobody hesitates to work together and do things that'll benefit the region in general. It's a nice feeling, and it's a wonderful community to work in.
What about the future here at Montanor? What's coming next here? Any projects on the horizon, or more of the same?
Yeah, we're going to be moving to a larger winery, a more efficient winery space. Yet to be determined. It might be on the Laughlin Road property. It might be elsewhere. We're working on that project now, trying to find locations for that. We still don't know what our new vineyard property. We still haven't finished planting it out. It'll probably end up being around 120 acres planted. We're at about 75 right now, so we don't know what that wine tastes like. We'll make a few barrels this year for the first time. That's very exciting, and of course, nothing happens fast in the wine world, right? So it's kind of a process. We've launched a new brand of lower price wine that's some out of here, some that we purchase from other growers or bulk, to fulfill that lower price by the glass business that we've kind of moved up from. So we don't want to lose it, and and people need to be able to buy a $15 bottle of wine on Wednesday nights, so we're happy to sell it to them. So that's a completely separate brand called Borealis, complete different identity. And we just launched that this month.
Oh, wow.
And then we also, we have a tremendous winemaking team, and that they've been here for years, and they love being here. And so to put it bluntly, I want to capitalize on that skill, So we've slowly been developing relationships with Washington growers, and last year we launched a brand of Washington wines, Cabernet, Chardonnay, and red blend called Cataclysm, that celebrates the Missoula flood again, based on that book, Cataclysms of the Columbia. And that's really gotten some great response and doing well in the market so far. So, we're keeping Montanor. We want to hold on to our land-based integrity of Montanor, but we want to grow the business. So we're creating these ancillary tracks. But still, Montanor is a brand that's from our vineyards with high-quality farming, over-delivering to a loyal customer base. So we want to keep it that way.
What about for yourself? Anything on the horizon outside of wine, or anything you're looking forward to?
Well, I'm 72 years old, so I'm thinking a lot about that, right? I have a little 5-acre farm that my wife and I are, she's a retired landscape architect, and, the two of us get great joy out of gardening and farming. We have a little vineyard over there that I make wine for the family, and send the rest of them over here to Montanor. I think that's going to take up a lot of my time. We love to sail. We have a sailboat on the Columbia, so in the summers when we can get away from the farm, we do a lot of sailing. I play music, regularly, daily. Cook, grandchildren. Looking forward to more time for reading and contemplation. I don't know. We'll see what happens, but so far that's what it looks like. And revisiting, I have family still in Italy, and we have a little house where my dad grew up that I have with my siblings. So spending some time up there is really fun and just different and a good way to spend some time too. So that's what I see for myself. I don't see stepping away from the winery anytime soon. We're doing too many fun things, and it's just really fun. It's fun to see there's a beautiful cycle in the wine world of this annual cycle of the spring and then the fall harvest and the winemaking, and then you do it again and you do it again, and each year has its own personality, and that's another lovely thing about Oregon. We really do have vintages, so that I really enjoy. All these new vineyard projects are really fun, and I work very closely with our viticulturists, trying to be creative and not just put in grapes and VSP and, just try to figure out how to do it. We want to think before we put one vine in the ground. We're trying to anticipate what's the best way to grow it based upon the site and the soil and all the other conditions and variety. And so we're trying to get really creative to maximize quality as well as being a good business investment. So kind of the whole picture. So those things are fun, and I'll continue to be engaged in all that. And other than that, I don't know what I'm doing.
It sounds like a lot, so that should keep you going. Well, all the questions I have for you.
Okay.
Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that we should have covered?
I think I rambled enough,
It's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your stories with us, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Oh, super.